Hello and welcome back to the Go-Karts and Good Times YouTube channel. Today we're finally going to be revisiting the mini bike. To most appropriately sum up the state that the mini bike is in right now, I'm going to throw in a couple of clips from the last time I actually took it out for a ride. If this was, say, a Predator, I'd be pretty pissed. But considering this is an old snowblower motor, I really don't care. Those clips are super old, so I'm not exactly sure what's in them. But as you can see here, there's a new window in the side of the engine. I was fairly certain that this engine had a rod knock forever, but I didn't really care because, once again, it's a snowblower motor that are super cheap and can usually be found by the side of the road if I ever need a replacement, and because there's not much that can really be done about it. That being said, I went ahead and thrashed it anyway, and this is why we are where we are right now. And that is where this motor comes in. This is a similar age to Tecumseh snowblower engine, but this one is 5.5 horsepower instead of the 8 that's on the mini bike currently. While this engine does have a different starter, the exhaust and intake ports are switched around, and I think overall it's a little bit smaller than the engine that's on the mini bike now. For the most part, I should be able to swap over most of the parts. My plan is to swap over every external part from the engine that's on the mini bike, but still leave the starter from this motor on because the recoil is pretty bad on this engine. And yes, like I've mentioned in other videos, this style tensioner is not ideal because it's not spring-loaded against the chain, but today I don't really have the time to redesign one, so that'll have to stay for now. That being said, it's time to start the time lapse where I tear apart the new engine and get the old one taken off the bike and parts swapped over. With the engine removed, you can get a bit of a better look of what's actually going on in there. I can't wait to get this thing torn apart and find all the little bits of metal in the bottom of the pan. First, I want to get the bike put together and get everything else cleaned up before I start tearing that engine down. So I'm going to move on to disassembling this one. Finally kind of how I want it to go on the bike. For the most part, I just need to swap over the exhaust and the carburetor that are sitting on the bike, as well as the brake and the clutch. Unfortunately, I chipped off a piece of the aluminum, but these threads go all the way into the exhaust, and again, I'm just using my straight pipe, which just threads right in. I also had to replace some of the super rusty head bolts, and I'm not sure exactly where the kill switch wire is, or if this engine even has one, but that's something I can sort out when it's on the bike, and I don't really need a kill switch that bad. Upon installing the engine, I made two pretty bad realizations. One is that the mounting plate for this engine compared to the other one is a thin piece of sheet metal, where on the other one, it's a cast piece of aluminum, which is much thicker, so I'll have to get shorter bolts. Also, on this engine compared to the original one, the intake angle is different, or at least for the bolt holes. So when I installed the old engine intake on the new engine, it's pointed down at the ground, which is completely not optimal. I doubt it'll even run, but I'll try to crank it up anyway. After trying to start it up, you can see what I meant by the recoil not liking to go back. I was hoping this was going to be fairly quick and be able to get it done by the end of the night so I could move on to bigger projects. The whole reason I'm doing this now is that there are bigger things looming on the horizon, and I'd like to get stuff like this done and out of my mind so that I can focus on that. I also want to note that this engine is fairly temporary because I'm hoping to find either a Briggs or another big Tecumseh to put on the mini bike, which is more optimal than this engine. And I'm hoping I can get bolts and find another intake by the end of the night by stopping by a friend's house, but if not, I guess I'll see you a different day. After making the aforementioned trip, I have what I need to make the engine work, or at least get it mounted up to the mini bike frame. I may end up having to make a custom manifold for the carburetor anyway. For now, at least it's mounted solid. And I think my quick and easy solution to this problem, because it's a temporary motor, is just spacing out the stock manifold from the other motor. It's basically going to be a 1-inch, maybe 2-inch tube with 2 flanges on it that are rotated at an angle, kind of similar to the original manifold that was on this engine, but it's meant to mate up to the manifold instead of directly to the carburetor. I have an old intake manifold that I welded together for another project a while ago, and I'm probably going to cut that up and use the flange and make something that'll work. This will be a little bit of stress to put on the aluminum and hanging off the side of the engine, but I think ultimately it should be all right. Like I mentioned before, I'll be cutting up this old manifold and using sections of tube as well as the flanges and welding them back together at the correct angles so that I can create an adapter. So once again, it's just a bunch of trial and error while I set you guys up on the tripod. Both sets of flanges having holes drilled in the proper places now, I just have to clean them up and test fit them on the bike to see what angle I need to weld them at. I'm going to skip showing you these steps because you basically get the gist from there and cut back to me welding them together. Now that I've got it welded up, I just have to let it cool down before I can blast it with a coat of paint to keep it from rusting and throw it onto the mini bike. I also want to add, these welds are really crappy, and I know I feel like I'm saying that every video now, but I really have to put more time into getting used to welding with gas. And currently my regulator on the tank isn't working quite right, so I guess that's another excuse, but I don't really want to be making excuses. Even though this is a small part I don't really care about, that shouldn't be an excuse for me to be okay with it being kind of crappy. I should really take the time to prep it extremely well and do practice welds on similar types of metals. This here is gas line, so it's a bit thick for the wire I'm using, but still, I could do a lot better than this. It's finally time for assembly, just like I said before. For the most part, I'm done, or at least I would be if the mounting plate on the bottom of this engine wasn't flipped the wrong way. I haven't seen this stamped steel style, and apparently it has its own set of bolts that mount to the engine so that it can be flipped, so that given a certain set of engine holes on the frame you're putting it on, you can put it closer or farther depending on the way you flip it. Unfortunately, it's the wrong way, so the chain is misaligned, and I have to take the engine off to swap it the other way. When it's done, I'll update you. If you didn't know what I meant from what I said before, as you can see here, there's a set of through holes for mounting it to the frame, but there's also a set of holes that lead into the bottom of the engine with threads into the block. Here, I have it tilted on the side so I can flip it over. As you can see now, after swapping the plate, it's still off, but to the opposite side it was before. This means that I'm only left with the option of drilling new holes in the mounting plate on the engine. I also realized a couple things about the chain. First, it needs to be oiled or greased pretty badly so that I can move freely, and that I need a new master link because when I took the chain off initially, the clip holding it together broke. For tonight, this is where it's going to lie. Tomorrow I will drill those holes and grab a master link. And hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to crack open the old engine and see how it looks on the inside. This project has already exceeded the time I allotted for it, but that's alright. I'm going to get those clips on my computer and edit it tonight, and then I'll pick up the camera again tomorrow. It's the next day, and I'm ready to get back to work on the mini bike. Like I said yesterday, I've got to rip off this engine plate and flip it back around so I can measure for where to drill the new holes. You already saw me do this yesterday, so I'll update you when I go to drill those holes. It doesn't matter which way I flip this, both ways it's the same amount off, just in a different direction, probably because it's a smaller engine with a different standard for how far over the side of the engine is. This means that I can drill this new set of holes here, but the other set of holes need to be right on the edge, so I'm going to weld on some chunks of steel so that it has enough surface area for a hole to be drilled through and mount up. Sure, this won't be as strong as the original mounting plate, but I think it'll be good enough. This video is becoming much longer than anticipated, but I guess it is what it is. So now I just have to throw you up onto the time lapse and get working. That it's finally done, and I'm not sure how much I trust my welds, but there are two other really strong bolt holes holding it on, and it's close to the edge of the real metal, so it should be all right. I really need to take the time to do some research and get the welders sorted out, just like I said earlier. Again, I'll spare you the boring details, but I'm going to get the engine mounted up, hopefully for the last time. Before I do so, however, I am going to spritz the exposed metal with paint. Before I get it bolted up, I just thought I'd show you what it looks like. With the engine remounted and the chain pretty much aligned where it needs to be, the only thing keeping me from taking it out on test ride is getting it running and getting a master link like I mentioned before. I don't exactly love how the engine is situated, but like I said before, this is temporary until I can find a better motor for cheap, and this should last me through some winter rips in the snow or some muddy spring rips, which is when I plan to get a new motor anyway. After a trip to the hardware store, I have the master link I need, and I have an exhaust nut to keep this one from vibrating loose and destroying the threads in the block like it did with the last engine. It still doesn't run well, but at least it's a proof of concept that it is back in riding action. Being totally honest, I really don't mind the orange. This thing is pretty cobbled together already, being a budget build, and I think it just adds to that aesthetic. As far as more riding goes, I'm sure as soon as my friend gets a shifter cart running reliably, I'll be on this and he'll be on that, and we'll be able to rip around the backyard for a cool little riding video. Unfortunately, this thing is sat parked because I haven't really had the time to sit down and mess around and tune the carburetors, which is really the last big step before I throw everything together and call it quote-unquote done. This is something I have little experience with and am very resistant to do because I don't want to mess anything up, and I don't think I'll be able to do it to the level it needs to be done anyway, so I'm waiting for my dad to help. Now, I just want to get cleaned up before I rip apart the old blown up engine. With things reasonably cleaner, now I can finally tear into this engine, something I've been waiting to do since it blew up. With the top of the engine taken off, you can't really tell from this half that anything is wrong, but you can obviously see here that the piston is jammed in crooked. If it wasn't already obvious, I'm going to be using the parts from this engine on future engines if I need them, so I'll be saving everything. Just about as far as I want to take it tonight. Basically, I have it torn off so I can easily access valves or grab the coil, grab the flywheel, anything. It's basically just cracked open. It's nice to find little bits in the bottom of the engine that can act as souvenirs. You can see just how badly this engine failed when it blew up. And it's kind of cool to have this big old Tecumseh piston with the snapped rod on the bottom. Like I said before, it's cool to have random bits of broken metal and extra parts, and I'll probably just put this box up with the other storage for engine components that I might need in the future. While not exactly a ton happened in this video, I did get the mini bike riding again, and I did break open the blown up engine, which I wanted to do for quite some time now. And I know, okay, it had a rod knock, it exploded, that was expected, but I've never really torn one of those down to that degree. Hopefully, in the next week or so, I'll get this running better and do some real riding on it, something I haven't done in months. After I get this cleaned up, I can start on my next project. One little hint is this Amazon package that I received after I bought something on Cyber Monday. This is going to be quite different for the channel, but I think it'll be good nonetheless. So I think I'm going to end the video here. Hopefully you enjoyed and got something out of me trying to rebuild my DIY little mini bike. Hopefully you'll stay tuned for future content on the mini bike, my car, motorcycle, and all the other projects that I have going on this channel. If you did enjoy, hopefully you'll like, comment, or subscribe. It means a lot to me and it really helps me out. For now, however, this is me signing off.